Blog Talk Radio.
Well, good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Monday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is July 24th in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the soggy central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. We had flood warnings out until 8 a.m. this morning, and we still got more rain on top of that. My yard is totally soggy. I was planning on hopefully mowing it this afternoon, but that ain't going to happen. Because when my yard gets wet, it's like a sponge down back. And hopefully some year I'd like to be able to get a couple 5-axle dump truck or tri-axle dump truck loads of topsoil in here, or mixed topsoil, and have it all spread out and maybe raise up some of the soggier parts of the yard anyway, and get the dips and everything out, make it easier for me to mow. But anyway, that's a whole nother subject. Today we're going to be talking about how the DOJ is on the wrong side of drugs in America. And this is one of those issues that has been going on in the federal government since the early 1900s with the banning on the import of opium and opium-related drugs, especially on the West Coast where these Chinese opium dens were opened up. And so the federal government's been unconstitutionally meddling in laws that they're not authorized by the Constitution. Now, we're going to talk about this because some folks out there have this misconception about, and they use the Commerce Clause, just like in the early 1900s, FDR used it during his administration. And in 1970, during the Nixon administration, they talked about it in expanding the Controlled Substance Act. So we're going to go through all these things, but we got to go back to the Constitution to begin with and talk about a couple of these things, especially with the Commerce Clause. And we've not that we've actually went over all 30 of the enumerated powers, but this one thing that we need to do on here is actually go over them, and I'm going to pull those up here while we're going over some commercial things here. And once again, I'm for whatever reason I can't remember to open up all my articles out of my folder here, so I have them ready for the show. I'm getting everything else ready. I'm reading mainly what it is. I'm reading over articles to get my mind wrapped around what I'm going to say today, and so my show prep is kind of off. And especially on Mondays. I went to the Y today and had my aquatics therapy done at the Y. Went very well. I am tired because I hadn't done it since Friday. I had 2 days off instead of just 1 day off, and so I didn't do as much today. I still was in the pool for 45 minutes like is my wont to do. So I did get a workout. I am a little bit on the tired side because of that workout, but the one thing that kind of amazes me about this, walking didn't do this, stretching out and doing some calisthenics didn't do this, but getting in that warm pool Actually, even though I'm fatigued afterwards and still feel a little bit fatigued now, my muscles don't ache like they were. And so hopefully that's going to be a continuing side effect of my aqua therapy with my fibromyalgia. So let's get into the show here. Today's show, they're not being brought to you by the Rocky Mountain High brands, but this is the official drink of the Dan Clements Show. And we're going to continue this on. Hopefully someday in the future I'll get a sponsorship with them. But for right now, they are the official drink. I do drink the lemonade. It's the only one that doesn't have caffeine in it, which I've totally sworn off of caffeine items. But they have a variety of drinks, 16-ounce drinks with 100 milligrams of hemp oil infused into them. They also have power shots if you're into those type of things. Protein bars. They have Eagle Spirit Drink, which are really pushing right now. It's a alkaline water drink that's supposed to be very healthy for you. So if you like, and trust, you don't have to take my word for it, but I'm telling you, I've tried them all. They're excellent. They are very good. The hemp oil seems to help with my pain. And this past delivery here, I got a surprise. Evidently, the case that I bought got damaged in coming here. And so evidently, and this is UPS that delivers these, UPS, when something like that gets damaged, instead of sending it back, they'll just order another case. And so I got 2 cases for the price of 1 because of the damaged case. I would never have paid for the damaged case. And they, a lot of times they'll just send those on when there's something like that. So I got 2 cases for the price of 1. So I'm good to go for over a month because I drink 1 can a day. I don't drink it like it's water or anything. I use it, like almost like a herb. And full disclosure, I do have stock in Rocky Mountain High brands as part of our retirement portfolio. All right, let's get into hang on a second, let me get that down there. All right, daily Bible reading today is in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 13 through 16. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 13 through 16. Therefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, not conforming yourselves to the former lust, as in your ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy. I just want to focus in on 15 and 16, but as he has called you as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in your conduct. This side of heaven, we're never ever going to be totally 100% holy in all of our conduct. But it is something we should strive for. It is something we should try to make it a habit in our lives. Just like sin used to be a habit in our lives and it's not anymore, walking in holiness and doing things the way God wants us to do those, being holy in God's sight, doing that, we should strive to make that our habit in life. Today's quote meal comes from T.R. Milford. Christians must learn again what Christians have always known, how to live without immediate hopes in this world. I don't care if you're a Christian or not. If you place your hopes on the things that are happening in this world, you're going to be sorely disappointed. Because 9 times out of 10, they're not going to work out for you. They're not going to work out like you hope them to work out. And you're going to get disappointed, you're going to get crushed and depressed and all those things. So we must, as Christians, I've seen way too many Christians get weighted down with the cares of the world. And they allow that to take them away from their Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And we must not do that. We must not. I have a good sermon outline here by Jason Rink. I skipped down one. By Kevin Cowley. Now, he did this sermon way back in July 30th in 2005, but it's a good one. It keeps popping up every now and then, at least the subject does. Sermon on the problem of evil. Why do people blame God? I've always wondered that. That almost ties into that whataboutism. What about them? What about, I get caught doing something. Well, what about them? They're doing it too. Why don't you pick on them? Well, they didn't get caught and you did. And I just blaming people for especially in our society today, and I think this goes right along with this, blaming people for something that they had no control over that happened way before, I mean, generations before we were born, yet we're expected to make reparations and apologize for it, a whole slate of things, is the same thing as blaming God for every evil that happens in the world. It doesn't make any sense. And so it's a good sermon outline. Go do some studying. I use these a lot to do studies with because they lay it out in a really good study format, because these are in sermon outlines over at gewatkins.net. Really good source for study material. Okay, let me find this real quick since I opened my big mouth. Let's see, let's go back there. 30 and new. Boy, I hit the. Oh, I'm lucky today. I hit it right off the bat. This is by the 10th Amendment Center. Article 1, Section 8. Excuse me. Even though I know it's not caffeinated, coffee still tastes good. I still like my coffee in the morning. It just gives me that perception of waking up. All right. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution is widely cited as being an exhaustive list of congressional powers. But in reality, there are a total of 30 and up to 35, depending on how they are counted, congressional powers that are listed throughout the document. And he has links up on there. This is just a reading document for me. And the link will be in the show notes page over at the DanClementShow.com. You can go check these links. 10th Amendment Center, very, very good educated site that'll take you through the Constitution, and especially now the 10th Amendment Center is talking about the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, that the powers not delegated by the Constitution are held for the state or the people, or held for the state power or the people themselves, and I just paraphrased that. But let's go down through these real quick here. To lay and collect taxes, duty, imposts, and exercise, to pay the debt and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, but all duties, imposts, and exercises shall be uniform throughout the United States. That means you can't charge one state one and another state a different amount. They have to be uniform. Now we see that general welfare clause and a pop up in there, and a lot of people misconstrue that as because they see the welfare in there. Oh, well, that authorizes welfare in the United States, and we talked about this on specifically on this particular show that this is out of, and that would be episode 845 if you're counting episodes. So that's where you'll find that, and I'm going to be doing some throughout the course of the next weeks or so. I'm going to be doing a few shorter videos to put up on YouTube and VidMe that talk about the enumerated powers, welfare, general defense, some of these others that people really misconstrued, supremacy law, that people really don't understand, and they only believe what they're told instead of, and folks, I'll tell you right now, don't believe me. Treat me as if I'm lying through my teeth and go research this for yourself. That's the only way you're going to learn, and hopefully you'll trust me, but don't. I'm telling you, you need to go do your research for yourself. Quit relying on people for your own research and knowledge. Okay, next one, to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Next one, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and within the Indian tribes. And we're going to deal with the Commerce Clause today on the show, because this is something that comes up, and they stretch it beyond belief. The Supreme Court has stretched it beyond belief. And if you go back to the original framers of the Constitution to see what they said about the Commerce Clause, there's no way the Supreme Court could have come up with the expanded definition, especially during FDR's time, of the Commerce Clause. And that's what happens when the states allow the federal government to do this. And this is key. This is one of these reasons why the 10th Amendment Center actually exists. To establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States. Well, right there, Congress has the power to govern over immigration. The rules of naturalization, that deals with immigration and that. So they do have that constitutional power to do so. To coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coins, and fix the standard of weights and measures. to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin in the United States, to establish post office and post roads, to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for a limited time to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries, to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, federal courts, things like that, to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations, to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on lands and water, to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer than 2 years, term for 2 years, to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, and they're talking about the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice here, okay, and also the rules for how the government's actually going to work within this framework, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions, to provide for, and just hang on a sec to back that up a little bit, this is one of those powers that President Lincoln was relying on when the South seceded from the North, and there's a lot of argument on both sides about that, whether it was right or wrong. Provide for organizing armies and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not extending 10 miles square as may by concession or cession of particular states, and the acceptance of Congress become the seat of the government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the United States, in which the same shall be for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. And there's another caveat on there. They need the consent of the legislature of the state. And this is what a lot of people forget about with this. They can't just go build a fort wherever they want if the state doesn't want it there. To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying out into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by the Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or office thereof. So that enumerated power there says they're allowed to make laws that shall be proper and necessary for carrying out into execution the foregoing powers. Talking about the enumerated powers that are being enumerated by the states, that the states granted to the federal government. And in those and those alone they have the supremacy. Anything outside these enumerated powers, they do not have the supremacy. And the list goes on. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any imports or duties on imports or exports, except what may be absolutely necessary for executing its inspection laws, and the net produce of all duties and imposts laid by any state on imports and exports shall be for the use of the Treasury of the United States, and all such laws shall be subject, to the revision and control of Congress. The Congress shall determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. In case of the removal of the president from office, or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of the said office, the same shall devolve on the vice president, and the Congress may, by law, provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability both of the president and vice president, declaring what officer shall then act as president, and such officer shall act accordingly until the disability be removed or the president shall be elected. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The trial of all crimes, except in the case of impeachment, shall be by jury, and such trial shall be held in the state where the said crime shall have been committed, and when but when not committed within any state, the trial shall be at such place or places as the Congress may by law have directed. The Congress shall have power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood or forfeiture except during the life of the person attainted. Full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state, and the Congress Congress may, by general law, prescribe the manner in which such acts, records, and proceedings shall be provided in effect thereof. New states may be admitted by the Congress into the Union. The Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or any particular state. Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the states, or by the conventions of 3/4 thereof, as one or the other modes of ratification may be proposed by Congress. And there, like I said, the 10th Amendment went through the whole Constitution and saw other powers, like in Article 5. And this, getting to the Convention of States here real quick, the actual language of the Constitution says, shall propose amendments to the Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the states, several states, shall call a convention proposing amendments. There's no ambiguity there, folks. There is no, well, Congress is like, well, we're not going to call this convention. They have no other recourse but to call that convention, and that's it. Just saying that the states are in convention to amend the Constitution of the United States. That's it. That's Congress's only role in Article 5, where the states call the convention. And this is one of these things I just want to spend a second or two on. This is one of these things where I've listened to constitutional scholars that are against states doing this, and none of them have put forth a very good. They put forth arguments, but they're not very strong arguments why we shouldn't have an Article 5. And it just amazes me how these guys are so afraid that the states are going to do something. It's going to ruin the whole Constitution or turn over the Constitution, and that couldn't be further from the truth. But anyway, I don't want to get too far off on that. I just wanted to point it out. And there's only a couple left. The House of Representatives shall choose their speaker and other officers, and shall have the sole power of impeachment. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for the purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall provide, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. The times, places, and manners of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations except for the places of choosing senators. Of course, if you're a constitutionalist and you've been following me for years, you'll know that before 1913 and the 17th Amendment, senators were chosen by the states and sent to Congress. They were not elected by popular vote in the states. That way the states had power to control things in the federal government. In 1913, we got away from that, and senators were popularly elected. So if they're popularly elected, who are they actually beholden to? Well, a lot of people say that the people of the states, but the role of the Senate has never changed. Now, this is just my summation of this and my thoughts on this. The role of the Senate's never changed. It was always originally designed to be a check for the states on the federal government. But not too many years ago, probably back in, I think it was during Bill Clinton's presidency, where I think it was Washington State or Oregon was actually trying to recall their senator. And because of the 13th Amendment making the senators federal, which I don't understand because they're still elected by the states, they still need to be beholden to the states somehow, somewhere, that the states couldn't recall that senator. and I can't remember exactly who it was, but I remember it was one of those left coast states out there. So those are the enumerated powers that are found in the Constitution, and that's it. And today, like I said, today we're going to be talking about the drug wars and drugs. I was just watching One American News Network this morning, where Attorney General Jeff Sessions was really coming down on this marijuana issue. And the one thing I never hear from folks that want to hammer and take and do something with marijuana, and we'll just deal with marijuana for right now, and we'll get into some of the harder stuff, but we'll deal with marijuana. These folks that are against marijuana, you don't hear them speaking out against something that's much worse than marijuana and takes a far more lives, and that's alcohol. And alcohol is a legal drug. It is a drug, whether you like to admit it or not. And alcohol in the country takes far more deaths. I didn't look up the percentage or the numbers or anything recently, but I remember looking them up in the past, and they've always outstripped drug use in general, but especially if you take it down, just say marijuana. Alcohol is far more dangerous to the country than marijuana, but you don't hear them talking about restricting alcohol again, because we know how well that went when they did that back in the 20s when the Prohibition came in. So you have Jeff Sessions up there on the Hill just blasting away at marijuana. I actually have stocks in some of the medical marijuana and some other things. One of the things that they're trying to do is states are telling the federal government, really thumbing their nose at the federal government over hemp production. Because for far too long, and I think this is a gross constitutional violation for the federal government, farmers were paid not to farm something on their lands. Let it go furrow. And they had to put it in this some type of land trust. And if they were caught farming it or whatever, they'd get in trouble. Well, the problem with that, it takes the free market out of the equation. And folks, when you take the free market out and let a bunch of bureaucrats try to do something economically, where they have no consequences for price control, as far as how much something costs, how much it costs to make it, how much you're going to get out of it to sell, and if they get that wrong, they suffer no consequences. The bureaucrats never ever suffer consequences when they regulate things. Never happens and never will. So if the bureaucrats aren't held accountable, what we need to do is hold the federal government accountable for the bureaucrats, and especially on these things that are unconstitutional. The FCC. Nowhere in the Constitution, except for maybe the Commerce Clause, can you justify the FCC. And again, in the Commerce Clause, and I'll just reiterate this again, is to make, the original Commerce Clause is to make commerce regular between the states. That's it. That's the only regulation that should be out there for the Commerce Clause, is to make regulations regular. If you do business across the state line, this state can't prevent you from doing this, and this state can't impose an import or export tax on you for your goods. Now, if you're in that state and you're making money in that state and this state, according to a federal tax code, which is totally just, you have to pay taxes, federal taxes in this state, you have to pay another set of federal taxes in this state. Of course, now, as far as state taxes are concerned, that's a different story. If you're going to do business in that state, you got to know what the corporate taxes are in that state. If you don't like the corporate taxes in that state, you go to another state that has less corporate taxes. It's just as simple as that. I'm getting too far afield here, but that's in essence the Commerce Clause. And so when we see the Commerce Clause that's being used, too many people don't know what the Commerce Clause says. Now, I got this article. I didn't get a chance to put it. I'll put a link up in there. This is from the Constitution Society, and this is by the original understanding of the Commerce Clause. And we need to get this out of the way, and we might even go into a second show about this tomorrow to cover all this, because I know my time is waning. I got half an hour left, and I got a lot to get over here today. So most federal, and this is by John Rowland, by the way. This is original understanding of the Commerce Clause over at constitution.org, one of my sources that I read up on these things about the Constitution, and I just use these sources to augment my understanding of the Constitution, because I think I got a pretty clear understanding of the Constitution, because I go back to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary of 1828 and define the terms like commerce and general welfare, things like that, what it was meant and how it was used in those days. We don't do that much anymore. At least a lot of people don't do that much anymore. So, most federal criminal legislation is based on either the tax or commerce clauses, but competent historians of the founding era will find that these clauses do not authorize criminal legislation. I don't understand where taxes come in. I'm doing some more studying on this, but I definitely understand where the Commerce Clause comes in, because a lot of times crimes go across state lines. And so they use the Commerce Clause to go after them. However, crime and criminality and the profiting from that is not commerce. It's anti-commerce. Okay, so how can the Commerce Clause have anything to do with that? I mean, just simple, basic common sense and logic that I'm trying to put out here. Okay, for the term commerce, we can, my eyes aren't what they used to be. For the term commerce, we can bundle elements of this all together. Disaggregate, I've never heard of that word before. Disaggregate to bundle elements that might include and examine usage to determine which of the elements were included in the original understanding. Tangible articles, transfer of ownership, transfer of location, transfer of possession, direct services, securities, monies, publications, powers, etc., exchange of a valuable consideration, and the list just goes on and on down through there. There's 17 of them actually. Mr. Rowland says, my research of instances of use in what became the United States finds only that commerce among the states meant transfer of a valuable consideration of ownership or possession of a tangible commodity from a vendor in one state to a customer in another. The word commerce was almost never used in common parlance in the colonies or newly independent states. A search of newspaper speeches and letters of that time and place finds few instances of it. The word is originally French, and we have this from Emmerich de Vattel in his Law of Nations, 1958, Book 1, page 92. Commerce consists in mutually buying and selling of all sorts of commodities. Vattel was well known and often cited by the founders. In other words, interstate commerce would not, for example, include a sale from someone in Lower Michigan to someone in Upper Michigan that happened to be delivered via Illinois. It also found as objects of such regulation, aggregation only up to the level of a single shipment of multiple units, not some stream that might include non-qualifying objects. As originally understood, interstate commerce did not include primary production such as farming, hunting, fishing, or mining. It did not include services, securities, or communication. Nor did it include manufacturing, transport, retail sales, possession, use, or disposal of anything. It did not include anything that might have a substantial effect on commerce or the operations of parties not directly related to the actual transfer of ownership or possession. It did not include all traffic. There is an applied power to regulate traffic to the extent necessary to separate commercial traffic from non-commercial, such as to require the traffic move through ports of entry and be subject to inspection. But once non-commercial traffic is identified as such, it is no longer constitutionally subjected to regulation. However, carrying human passengers would not qualify as commercial traffic, even though it might be done for hire, because humans are not tangible commodities being traded, with the temporizing exception of slaves until the logical incompatibility of slavery with the language of the Constitution could be resolved. The decision in Gibbons was correct, but justification in the opinion was not. The authority for regulating coastal traffic rests on the Defense Clause, which implies the power to control entry into the territory of the nation and the approaches to it. And he has a link to his commentary on that. Further, as originally understood, the power to regulate was not the power to prohibit, nor did it imply the power to impose criminal penalties for violation. While a regulation might be considered as a prohibition to some maladies of something like packaging, labeling, handling, routing, or scheduling, it could not be prohibition of all modalities, goods, in other words, folks. Use big words in there. There must always be some goods that are permitted. The restriction must be reasonable and must serve a public purpose and not favor one segment of the market or other. And today, folks, the way they've stretched the Commerce Clause out, there's all sorts of considerations being given out for this company or that company to move goods and services throughout the country. And this is really good here when he gets into this little quick section here. He says, further, I find no instances where necessary and proper are carrying into execution of foregoing powers meant convenient for achieving any purpose for which the power might be exercised. It was recognized that many delegations of power would not be sufficient for many purposes for which they might be exercised, but the delegation was only to exercise the power within its bounds, not to do whatever it might take to accomplish a goal. And folks, this goes right along with what I've been talking to folks a lot today about the anti-freedom folks. They have this goal in mind, this end goal that they have. They have a narrative that's built around it. They have talking points and bullet points and all this kind of stuff that is built up to get to that goal. And anything outside of that bubble of that goal is just nonsense. It's not acceptable. And so what he's talking about here is, and I like this, but the delegation was only to exercise the power within the bounds, not to do whatever it might take to accomplish a goal. Now again, we need to go back, just like the Bible. If you go from the book of Genesis to the book of Revelation, there's a scarlet thread of redemption. From the book of Genesis, we're looking forward to the Christ and his coming and his sacrifice on the cross. From the book of Acts all the way through the end of Revelation, we're looking back to the cross. And even today, we're looking back at the cross. Okay? And I liken this onto the Constitution. The Constitution is the same way in this regards, that it is defined. The Bible is defined as the coming of the Christ to die for man's sins, to reconcile him to God. So if you want to boil down the Bible in a nutshell, that's what it is. Now you got to go further to understand a lot more things about God and that. Don't take a theologian to do it. Just like the Constitution does not take a constitutional scholar to understand the Constitution. And so you look at the Constitution, what was their purpose? James Madison in Federalist Papers 45 said, we've created a federal government to be a limited government and have defined powers. And they enumerate them. I just talked to you about the enumeration of powers. So the general idea of the Constitution is to set up a limited government with defined powers. So any clause, general welfare, general defense, the Commerce Clause, any clause that you find in there has to fall under the first definition of the Constitution. It's a limiting, defining document. It's not an expansive document. It was never meant to be that way. And when you take things out like general welfare, general defense, the Supremacy Clause, the Commerce Clause, you take them out of that context of a limited government with defined powers, then you can come up with all sorts of things. But that's not the original intent of the Constitution. And when people do that, we get in a lot of trouble when they do that. And we find that a lot of people get hurt. We find that a lot of people get hurt because of that. And you're asking me, well, how do people get hurt? Because of the overregulation. Because of the overregulation that we have in America. And we're talking about drugs here. What happened, and we got to go back to Prohibition. What happened during Prohibition? Well, they outlawed alcohol in the United States, the production and sale of alcohol. And I don't think it was a total, because there was still some government stamped alcohols and stuff like that, but it was as total as it was going to get. But Americans, whether they liked it or not, still, they didn't like the 18th Amendment, because they'd have followed it. And they're thinking, well, what is the federal government? And even though it was constitutional, Prohibition was constitutional, it was ratified. It didn't make good sense. It didn't make good law, because that amendment was restricting the liberties and freedoms of American citizens. And what arose of that, because American citizens were like, and I imagine there was a lot of American citizens that were totally against this, but it got pushed through anyway, just like almost like Obamacare. A lot of Americans were against it, and to take over someone's health care and their decisions, and just say, and run it through without bipartisan support in the Congress, and saying, well, we have the majority, we're going to put this through. I think you're violating people's freedoms and liberties in doing that. So you're making, in my opinion, you're making bad law when you do that. And the 18th Amendment was definitely bad law. It created a black market, and in that black market, there was rum runners like the Kennedys, and the Kennedys made their fortune. And you can go look this up. You can get mad at me later. You can look this up. The Kennedys made their fortune by being rum runners from the Caribbean. That's where they get their money. That's where they still get a percentage of the sales of rum that comes to the United States here. Because they legitimized everything after Prohibition was done. But they made a lot of money during Prohibition by breaking the law. And so the veneration that people have for the Kennedys, to me, is, I don't know. It's weird and funny. But anyway, you have the Al Capones, and he keeps coming up as an example. You have the Al Capones of the world out there that came in and ruthlessly, I mean, by killing folks, to dominate in Chicago the alcohol coming into the United States through Canada and Chicago, the whole 9 yards. He dealt with, he handled a lot of alcohol. And it was very bloody. And when you get into black markets like that, black markets are by nature lawless. So they're not going to report. If I'm smuggling rum in, and someone else, my competitor, smuggling rum in, and they take pot shots at me, or they destroy a boat or something like that, who am I going to tell? Who am I going to tell, right? I can't tell the law. Well, how'd you lose your boat? Well, I'm a rum runner. And this guy over here blew up my boat. Well, wait a minute, son. You're a rum runner? Excuse me, we have Prohibition going on here. And you see how that goes. Well, we found out through Prohibition of alcohol, it doesn't work. And some of us remember that lesson. But it seems like, especially since 1970 on, it seems like America and politicians never learned that lesson of Prohibition. They want to restrict people's freedoms and liberties. Now, I want to say this before we get too much further into the drug thing, that there was a time in my life that I was a borderline alcoholic, and I did a lot of drugs. I smoked cigarettes. I was a bad man, and I don't mean that to be funny about it. I was a bad man. I was a bad person. Okay. However, I don't use drugs today. I don't want anybody in my personal circle to use drugs or alcohol. If they have a problem with it, I'll do whatever I can to help them get over that addiction, because it is addiction. It's a human weakness that leads to an addiction, and it is addictive. A lot of things are addictive. Pornography is addictive, but people don't see the harm in that. How it hurts the family and how it hurts the husband-wife relationship, or how young men aren't even getting married anymore. Of course, there's a feminist movement out there to talk about that. But anyway, these addictions are destructive. But is it the federal government's proper role to prohibit or forbid these addictions? And you can talk about a lot of these things, folks. And it's not only those. There's a lot of things that the federal government has laws against that they have no business governing over. It's state's power. If the state wants to govern over that, they get with the people and the people's representatives from the state and do the governance over these things. You see how this is going here. So what's happened with the drug war? And I have some really good information in here, and I'm not going to get to all of it today, but I have some really good information. If you go over to the DanClementShow.com and click on this show for today, the DOJ is on the wrong side of drugs in America. And down in the description, the episode number is 848. Okay, it's episode 848 in the description. You'll find a lot of these, and like I said, we're going to talk about some more of these tomorrow about drugs and stuff. And I also have other articles in here that go along with what is wrong with governments like this one? Sports owners dip into the public's purse despite their billions in the bank. This is by Michael Powell over at New York Times. He did a really good article on this. I've been talking about this for a couple of years now. It never made sense to me that these multi-billionaire individuals or corporations that own these sports teams are dipping into the public purse. And honestly, I've read a lot of stories pro and con, and there's more out there that give more evidence, more certified, confirmed evidence saying that the city does not benefit as much as people claim it does economically with these sports teams. But yet the public in those communities are footing the bill for these stadiums. And I've always been against my tax dollars going for any type of stadiums, and it happens here in Pennsylvania, not only Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, but they get state funds too to help them out. So we're talking about a lot of some lot of shady things that happen with the law, whether it's unconstitutional or not. And there's some things in there talking about capitalism. I got a couple good articles here you really need to read from the public discourse. Capitalism, the quest for community, and why premarital sex is wrong. And I haven't got through that whole article there, but they should be good reads for you guys. How the totalitarianism of the environmentalists, and a lot of these anti-freedom groups are very tyrannical and totalitarian in their thinking, because if you don't think their way, you're wrong and you need to be taken care of. You need to be dealt with, as it were. Capitalists are no angels, but socialism is hell on earth. Look at Venezuela. Look south. East, north, south. Look south. I had to get more into. I need to put a compass up on more south. You got to look south to Venezuela to see that. Oregon lawmakers have voted in the bill to bail out Planned Parenthood. I guess Oregon's going to foot the bill for a lot of what the federal government's not going to give them. That's ridiculous out there. And this one here, I thought this was funny. Senator Chuck Schumer from New York, is saying, don't blame Russia or Comey when you lose to someone like Trump. and that tells me again, just real quick here before I get back into the rest of this, that tells me again that there was nothing to this Russian narrative at all. It was all fabricated and fake, because even Chucky Schumer isn't buying it anymore. And and every day it comes out. Kushner was on the news today. Nothing to see there. Every place they look on the Republican side, there's nothing to see. But you don't see the lamestream media looking into the Democrat side of things and seeing the collusion between Hillary and Putin with the uranium, and now this Lynch, former Attorney General Lynch, has ties with that Russian lawyer Natasha, and it's like all this coming out against the Democrats. So anyway, getting back into our constitutionality thing here. I have this other blog in here. It's a 10th Amendment Center blog. They're very good over the 10th Amendment Center to get down to these constitutional things. Is the drug war constitutional? And let me get into, there it is. Is the drug war constitutional, by Jason Rink. At the recent South Carolina Republican debate, Chris Wallace with Ron Paul, or asked Ron Paul, and this happened to be during a few years back. I never find the dates on these blogs. Maybe I'm looking in the right place, but it's still relevant today. He just sort of set the scene up here. How he expected to win the votes of social conservatives by supporting the legalization of all drugs, now, including heroin. Now, I think they need to find a new term for this. I really do. When they're talking about legalization of drugs, one of the things that's a misnomer that they don't explain correctly is they're going to decriminalize the penalty for the end user. Instead of spending that money on jail time and actually turning these folks into hardened criminals for a crime of free will here, they need to use that money to offer them treatment programs, possibly even court-ordered treatment programs, to get them off these drugs. That would, a lot of people agree, that would be a cheaper and better use of the money, instead of having this prison industrial complex going on, where these prisons are just growing and growing and growing, and a lot of people are making money off these prisoners. And if you take, it would almost decimate the private prison system out there if you took everybody out of prison who was in there for being an end user, not a dealer, but being an end user and got addicted to these drugs. It would bankrupt these folks. That's how many people are in the prisons for that. So when they're talking about legalization of all drugs, that's part and parcel to it. All right, it's just not making criminals out of the end users, actually getting them help. And I think that, again, would be certainly a better way to do things. Certainly, that isn't a position you will find many Republicans endorsing these days. Paul's answer was not only the funniest moment in the event, it was also the most instructive. Here's the bottom line. The federal government does not have the authority to pass laws regarding nonviolent personal habits. If such laws were to be enacted, it would have to be done at the state level. I believe that Congressman Paul is the most qualified candidate to speak on this issue of drugs and drug legalization. First, he is a doctor. He has prescribed medication many times since his days as a flight surgeon in the Air Force. He's also testified in the past that personally, he doesn't think drug use and abuse is a particularly healthy lifestyle choice. The federal war on drugs has proven costly and ineffective while creating terrible violent crime. But if you question policy, you are accused of being pro-drug. This is preposterous. As a physician, father, and grandfather, I abhor drugs. I just know that there is a better way through local laws, communities, churches, and families to combat the very serious problem of drug abuse than a massive federal government bureaucracy. And quite frankly, folks, that's what all the federal government is trying to do is stop the end user from getting the drugs. But when they take the end user and try to stop that end user from using drugs, they make a criminal out of them. And so if you take off the federal government books, if you take off the federal government books the drug laws and actually make some common sense ones, like if you're still dealing, that's against the law. If you're importing drugs, that's against the law. But if you're using the drugs, it's not against the law, but we're going to get you treatment. You see what I'm saying? If they and the thing is, if they take away, and this is what they should have done through prohibition, instead of making a law, if people were taught that alcohol is no good for you, as far as being, becoming an alcoholic and drinking it steadily and stuff like that in social settings, if they'd have taught people that and got more people to quit drinking that way instead of making a law, we wouldn't have had the Al Capones. Same way with the drugs. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's a hard drug or not. Most drug use, if you look up the statistics, and I don't have them right at my fingertips right now, most drug use is nonviolent. And does it destroy families? Yes. I'm not going to sit here and say it doesn't destroy families at all. Just like the nonsense, I think it's nonsense with the seatbelt laws. One of the reasons why, well, it's not a victimless crime. You're going to leave your family, yada, yada, yada. Okay, that good, all good points. But to force somebody to wear a seatbelt, there are some reverse incentives to that. Okay, there are reverse incentives to that. I just read an article the other day where people that wear seatbelts feel safer because they're wearing seatbelts, so they're more reckless driving. and excuse me, see that NASCAR? They got them 5-pointers on there, man. Those guys go just hell-bent for leather. And they foot to the floor, man, and they're just going 100% at it. And they got all these protections around them, so that it gives them that sense of safety, a certain level of safety. And you see what I'm saying? The same way with these drug laws. These folks, when you decriminalize drugs, you no longer have, and I'm talking about for the end user, I'm not talking about for the dealer, and I'm not talking, and other countries have done this, we're talking about the dealers or the importers. But when we get people the help they need to not have to use these drugs, you dry up the source for the drugs as far as the need for them. Then you have these guys, these drug dealers and these importers. Where's their market then? You dry up the market, you'll dry up the drugs. Simple economics, therefore, supply and demand. The demand for drugs in America is so huge, and the profits are so huge, that the risks that these people are willing to take to make those profits, to me, are insane. But some people look at that, hey, I can make a quick buck here and maybe retire on some remote beach somewhere. And so they go for it. And what created that atmosphere? Federal laws. Federal laws created that atmosphere that are unconstitutional. Nowhere in that list that I read you enumerated powers does the federal government have the power to do this. Just like, let me get over to it here. Well, let me, this one's going to be long. I have the Controlled Substance Act on Wikipedia. I only have like 4.5 minutes, so I can't get into that. I do have an article here by Ellis Washington over at WND.com, and he posted back in 2007, Law 101, the Commerce Clause, FDR, and Original Intent. And he goes through and talks about original intent too, so we're going to pick that up again tomorrow. So back into this 10th Amendment center, is the drug war constitutional? Second, goes on to talk about Ron Paul some more. Second, Ron Paul's record shows that he has a better grasp of the concept of federalism and the Constitution than any other congressman currently in office. He has earned the title Dr. No because very little legislation passes his strict constitutional test. It's a simple one, really. It is the proposed legislation based on power specifically granted to the federal government in the U.S. Constitution. Federal drug prohibition does not pass that test. So what is about the drug decriminalization that gets social conservatives so hysterical? Is Ron Paul right about the drug prohibition, or is he simply smoking something? And a lot of people claim that he is smoking something. I don't think he is. According to the Constitution, legislation regarding drug use and abuse is a state-level issue. The issue is not addressed specifically in the text of the U.S. Constitution, so it falls under the broad umbrella of the powers that our founders left to the states and to the people in the 10th Amendment. Alcohol prohibition in the United States from 1919 to 1953 was supported by an actual constitutional amendment. Drug prohibition is not. This is an important point because unless something has drastically changed, drug prohibition would also require a constitutional amendment ratified by the states to have any semblance of legitimacy. Drug prohibition is simply a federal power grab. It's an end run around the constitutional amendment process because such an amendment would never pass. So while social conservatives may believe that it is perfectly reasonable for the federal government to impose harsh criminal penalties on what free citizens can put in their own bodies, our founders would clearly disagree. Paul made the point that granting the federal government the right to legislate what free people can and cannot put into their bodies when it comes to drug use would also give the federal government the right to tell us what we can or cannot eat, drink, or otherwise consume. So the same conservatives who decry Michelle Obama's war on trans fats unwittingly support such nanny-state legislation by endorsing the war on drugs. The truth is, most people would love to outlaw all the habits, opinions, and practices they find offensive in others. However, that would not be freedom. In the end, drug prohibition simply reveals most social conservatives do not differ from the liberal statists they oppose. If they were truly interested in preserving personal freedom and constitutional limitations the founders imposed on the federal government, they would demand an immediate end to the unconstitutional and failed policy of federal drug prohibition. And the millions and millions of dollars that are being wasted on that each and every year is just, it's fantastical to me. It really is. And so tomorrow, we're going to continue this into tomorrow. I have the stance of the Constitution Party on drugs. We're going to talk about the Controlled Substance Act. We're going to talk about this other article about the Commerce Clause, FDR, and the original intent. And then I have the last one I want to get into by Walter E. Williams, Drugs, Economics, and Liberty. And I think he puts the final nail, in my opinion, he puts the final nail on this. And this is, Walter E. Williams is a brilliant economist. And he's going to be, when he passes away, like Murray Rothbard, he's going to be sorely missed, and Mises and everybody. Is going to be sorely missed by a lot of folks. So, anyway, that's the end of the show. That hour went fast, folks. Boy, I enjoy myself when I'm doing a teaching type thing, and I really do that. So, that's the music. It's the end of the show. Fear not, I'll be with you tomorrow at noon. This has been the Dan Clemens Show. I'm your host, Dan Clemens, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. Again, we'll see you tomorrow at noon. Have a great rest of the day, and God bless.
Thank you